We always joke around saying, "Oh, Happy, are you happy?" Because he usually has a smile on his face. Well, unless someone upsets him, which happens about 3 times a year. I stayed in that place for about 19 years, so I know him well. He lives with his 2 brothers. One sells fruits, and the other drives a taxi. Happy doesn't have a job because he has a mental illness, and I think it might be a kind of schizophrenia, but I'm not sure which one. All I know is that he doesn't function like others. So you can't have a normal conversation with him about sports, news, or anything really. His sentences just don't make much sense. I should also mention that our country doesn't take mental illnesses very seriously, as we only have 3 places in the whole country for people with mental health problems. So there's no way for him to get good treatment, and people just call him crazy. It's really sad. My dad used to be friends with him and his brothers, but not anymore. My dad used to give him some money so he could buy cigarettes, and he knew that Happy's brother, the taxi driver, had to support his 2 kids in another city, and the brother who sells fruits didn't make much money. Happy used to help carry groceries sometimes, and Dad would also give him some money for that. So, since I was a kid, I only knew him as someone who was very helpful and friendly. I always smiled at him, and he would smile back at me. But when I turned 15, he had changed a lot. He still had a smile on his face, and he would stay outside in different shady spots all day, smoking. I used to wake up around 7 a.m. to go to school, and he was always there, wide awake, just smoking. It seemed like he either didn't sleep or woke up way too early. We would see him in a place that takes about half an hour for us to reach by car, so you can imagine how long it took him to get there on foot. He looked restless, but mostly he just stood there and smoked. This went on from early mornings to very late at night. His behavior changed in a disturbing way. He started staring at me with this forced and creepy kind of smile on his face. When I walked by him, he would always watch me without turning his head. He even walked backward while staring, and I noticed he did this every time. Sometimes, he would walk backward and press his back against walls like he was hiding or something. His whole attitude changed a lot. He started getting mad more often. He would yell things that didn't make any sense, and stomp angrily toward his house. Now, let me tell you what really happened to me. Like I mentioned, he always kept his eyes on me. I was 17 years old, and on the day this happened, I was at home alone. I stayed home to study while my family went out. He probably knew I was alone, because when they left, I saw him standing in his usual spot, staring at them as they drove away. When it was lunchtime, I went to buy some things to cook. I saw him standing next to his brother, who sells fruit at the local market. I went to the market to get vegetables and meat. The veggies were close to where Happy was, but the butcher was a minute away. As I paid for my meat and put it in my bag, I looked up, and there was he just staring at me. I didn't think much of it, so I turned right and walked towards home. But he was right behind me again. But still didn't think it was a big deal, because our houses are right next to each other. I passed his house, waiting for his footsteps to stop. But no, he was still right behind me. I looked, and his eyes were still on me with that really creepy smile. I didn't really care, because I thought he was just going to his usual spot to light a cigarette or something. I never felt like I was in danger in my neighborhood, so I don't get anxious easily, especially with him. Even during his angry moments, I didn't think he was the dangerous type, so no warning signs popped up for me. I went through the main door from the street and walked in a wide hallway that had one door where an old woman lives. I passed her door, turned right, and went up the stairs to my house on the 2nd floor. I heard someone come in through the main door, and in the hallway, I thought it was maybe one of the neighbors from the 3rd floor. The footsteps were fast, so I figured figured they were in a hurry. I turned to look at the bottom of the stairs to see who it was, and make space for them to climb quickly. But to my surprise, it was Happy at the bottom of the stairs. I stopped suddenly, and that's when my heart started pounding really fast. I asked, "Happy, what are you doing here?" But he didn't say anything. Instead, he started running right toward me, taking 2 steps at a time. I tried to climb faster, but he grabbed my foot, and I slipped. My right arm and knee hurt a lot from the fall. He was pulling me down the stairs, messing up my back too. But with all the adrenaline in me, I started kicking to free my ankle from his grip and screamed at him to let go. I also yelled for help, hoping a neighbor would hear me and come to rescue. With my free leg, I kicked his forearm to make him release me. I kept kicking and shaking the other leg too. Luckily, I got free, but I couldn't turn around, so I started climbing, scared he might follow me into the house, and who knows what he might do if he got inside. I just wanted to kick him, hoping he'd lose balance and fall off the stairs so I could get inside my house. I kicked and kicked, screaming, but it didn't work. It felt like a long time, but it was probably about 5 seconds, and then I heard the door of the old lady downstairs start to open. Happy heard it too, so he ran away. He passed by her house, but she saw him. Then she called my name and asked if I was okay. She stuck her head up from the bottom of the stairs, still calling my name. But all I could do was cry in fear and pain. My elbow was bleeding. She asked me to come into her house so she could help with my bleeding. I said it was okay, and I would take care of it myself. But she insisted, and kept calling me to come down. Eventually, I ignored her, climbed the stairs with difficulty, and got inside. After about an hour, I cleaned up, felt a bit calmer, and cautiously went to the old lady's house. I knocked, and she opened the door. I asked her not to tell my parents anything, because if my dad knew, he might really hurt the guy. I explained that Happy was just not right in the head, and my dad shouldn't go to jail for someone who's not thinking clearly. She promised not to tell my family, and that was the end of it. Over the next 2 years, he changed again, but this time he wouldn't even look me in the eyes. I would be walking, and he was walking towards me, but he would turn around and go another way, just to avoid passing near me. For the first few months, I was scared that he might be waiting around a corner or something, but it turned out he just didn't want to be seen by me. Even after I moved out, whenever I visit, and even now, 4 years later, he still avoids being seen by me. I hope Happy stays peaceful and doesn't harm any other girls in our neighborhood. But more than anything, I wish for more awareness about mental illness in our country. I hope people can get the right treatments and care they need. People like him really need it. I live on the 6th floor with my family, and we've been here for a long time. The apartment next to ours is owned by a not-so-nice lady who rents it out. But the problem is, she seems to rent it to people who cause a lot of trouble. I'm talking about serious problems, like drug dealers and domestic violence. And this happened a few years ago, when I was around 14 or 15 years old. I'm a female, and English isn't my first language, so forgive any grammar mistakes. A couple, probably 35 to 40 years old, had just moved in with their young daughter, who looked about 6 years old. The wife introduced herself, and she seemed nice at first. They mostly kept to themselves, and that was okay with us. But a few weeks after they moved in, things got tricky. They played really loud music during the day and night. It wasn't against the rules, but it bothered us when it went on for hours every day. Then we could hear shouting from their apartment, but it always seemed to be the husband doing the yelling. They started leaving their apartment door open, and when we walked by to use the elevator, they would be walking around in their underwear. It was strange, but we thought maybe it was because it was summer and hot. It became more bothersome when we had guests. two dogs, a medium-sized one and a small one, both rescued. I unlocked my apartment door, and the dogs went inside.
So I was flying right there.
Just as I was about to follow, I heard a hey behind me. I turned around and got scared when I saw who it was. It was the husband. For more information, we hadn't talked before this. He was very close to me, like just inches away from my face. And also, he was only in his underwear. He was taller than me by a lot, so I felt uncomfortable. I asked if he needed something, and then he quickly looked around, as if checking for other people in the small hallway we shared. After that, he came even closer, and I could feel his breath on my face. It smelled like weed, and I tried not to gag so I wouldn't be rude. At that time, I always tried to be nice to everyone, even in risky situations like this. Then, in a rough voice, he whispered, "What do you want?" I was confused. I thought I heard wrong, so I asked him to say it again. "What do you want? Drugs? Alcohol?" My eyes got really big. I was taught not to drink or do drugs, and even if that wasn't the case, I was clearly underage. So I didn't understand why he was offering these things to me. No thank you, mister," I said. I had hoped that by being polite, this interaction would be over, and I can go inside. If you're wondering why I didn't just go inside sooner, like I said, I was a major people pleaser, and I didn't want to offend him, but also I didn't know how he would react, as I didn't want to risk him chasing me inside or assaulting me. If he was unstable enough to corner a teenage girl in his underwear and offer her illegal substances, I didn't want to imagine what would have happened if I were to piss him off. "Oh, come on. You must want something, as I can hook you up with whatever." He gave me a wide grin and somehow stepped even closer. I moved my back against the door, realizing I couldn't make more space between us. Then, I let out a nervous laugh. "No thanks. My mom wouldn't like me having that," I said. He tilted his head, still smiling. "Well, is she home now?" Silly me, I said no. She was at work. "Oh, well, then she doesn't need to know. Just tell me what you want." I started breathing really fast. I've had problems with men being mean to me before, so a man standing over me and trapping me made me really anxious. I felt like I might throw up, and I could feel myself starting to shake. I just hoped he wouldn't notice. "No thanks," I said again. I have to go, as I have homework to do." I was trying to smile so he wouldn't know I was scared, but my shaking got worse. He seemed annoyed, but nodded and said to have a nice day. I hurried inside and quietly locked the door. I was breathing hard, and I peeked through the small hole in the door. But he was still there, just staring at my door. He looked like he was out of it, and I hoped he would leave. He stood there for about 30 more seconds, then suddenly turned around and ran into his apartment. I heard him going through cabinets, and in my mind, I thought he might be looking for something to break into my house. Now I was getting really scared. I grabbed my phone, called my dogs, and rushed to the kitchen to get the biggest knife I could find. I sat on the floor and stared at the door while calling my mom. I was almost crying when she answered, and she told me to call the cops if I thought I was in danger. But for some reason, I said no. Maybe I thought I didn't want to bother the police for something that might not be a big deal. My mom couldn't leave work early, but she called the cops as soon as she got home. Meanwhile, his wife had come back home. After a few minutes later, she knocked on our door. My mom answered while I stayed behind her. She asked my mom lots of questions about what I told her and what happened. When my mom explained and said the police were called, the wife nervously laughed and said it wasn't needed. "My husband didn't mean any harm. He was just trying to sell you some CDs he makes, as he really likes music." What? He kept asking me if I wanted alcohol multiple times, How did she start talking about selling CDs? But my mom didn't buy it, and she knows what really happened. She trusts me. The woman's smile turned into an angry face, and she went back into the apartment. We heard her lock the doors, close all the curtains, and turn off the lights. The police arrived shortly after and came inside to hear what happened. Then, they went to their door and knocked, but nobody answered. We told them we saw everyone go inside and lock themselves in, but they couldn't do anything about it because they didn't have a special permission, and no one physically hurt me. They said the man would get a warning, but only when they could reach him. The police left, and we didn't hear anything else from the neighbors all day. We went to bed later. I had trouble falling asleep, but eventually managed to. During the night, around 2 a.m., I woke up to a woman screaming. It was loud and really upsetting, and I thought someone might be in trouble. I heard my mom going to the closest window, and then she came to my room and said to stay in bed. I wanted to ask her more about what was happening, but I trusted my mom, so I stayed in bed like she told me. I stayed in my room and eventually fell asleep again. When I woke up, my mom sat me down at the kitchen table and explained that the man from yesterday had jumped out of the window during the night. Since we were on the 6th floor, he probably died when he hit the ground. The screaming we heard was from his wife watching him climb out of the window and then jump, unable to stop him. I felt really bad. I almost started crying, and it made me think that somehow it was my fault. After that incident, my mom felt bad for leaving me home alone to go to work, but she couldn't do much about it because we didn't have a lot of money. I was at home with my little brother because he was sick, and I wasn't going to school because I was too upset. Well, after a few days later when my mom left for work, there was a knocking at the door. I looked through the peephole and I saw it was the guy's wife. She was smoking a cigarette, her eyes were red, and she looked really upset. She was walking around and talking to herself. I told my little brother to go into his room and went to open the door. When I did, and the wife saw me, she started to get really angry and pointed her cigarette near my face. How dare you? Why did you call the police on my husband? Why? He didn't do anything to you. He just wanted to sell you some CDs, and you reported us. Are you scared of men or something? Are you scared of men in underwear? Is that it? I couldn't believe what she was saying. If it was me today, I would have told her to go away and shut the door right in her face. But at that time, I was young, not very smart, and too trusting. So what did I do instead? I said sorry. I told her I was sorry about her husband, and that I really hoped she could forgive me. You little piece of shit. You killed my husband. It's all your fault. And I wish that you, your mom, and brother all get sick and die. I looked down at the ground without saying anything, still sure it was my fault. She kept saying mean things, but eventually, she left. I went back inside, locked the doors, and cried. I cried for about half an hour, and my little brother kept asking what was wrong, but I didn't tell him. I've been talking to someone about my feelings and taking medicine for the past year or two. I can say I'm in a better place now. But I still think, how messed up do you have to be to blame a kid for something like the death of your husband, who clearly needed help with his feelings? We've been living in our neighborhood for almost 4 years. A few houses down and across the street, there's a nice Filipino family, and we talk when we see each other, no names, and even had meals together. We moved in just before my oldest child was born, so they always ask about the baby and enjoy seeing them. This summer, they had an older family member, maybe 55 to 60 years old, came to visit them. We noticed him because he often took long walks and spent a lot of time around. One evening, the mom of the family introduced him as her dad. He had recently moved and was staying with them for a while before heading north to her sister's house. He was new to the U.S. just enough to manage. At first he seemed nice, but when we went inside, I told my husband that he felt strange to me. I had never felt that way about any of their other 7 family members when I've been to their home or shared meals with them. They are usually very nice and friendly. My husband agreed that he seemed a bit odd, but we thought it might be because of cultural differences. Now skip ahead about a month. My mother-in-law and my mom came to visit at the same time. They were in the driveway with our son. I went inside because I'm pregnant again and dealing with really bad morning sickness. But 15 minutes later, when I came back outside, they were having a tough talk with this man. He wanted one of them to take him to the store, as he planned to use a food stamp or EBT card to buy the groceries, and asking them for cash in return. They both said no, but he kept asking and hanging around. So I called my husband to come out. When he saw them, he quickly walked away. Both our moms told us what happened and how pushy he was being. In the next few days when I saw him walking, we'd wave and say simple things. But every time I waved, he thought it meant he could come over and start a conversation. I told him what he did with our moms was very wrong and against the law. I said being so pushy wasn't necessary. He said he understood. It was always when I was busy strapping my toddler into his car seat, trying to get him to school quickly. It took about 10 minutes each time for him to get the hint that I couldn't talk. It got so bad that I started checking if he had walked past our house before going outside. I just didn't want to have that awkward conversation. He always seemed to appear just as I finished putting my son in the car. And it also felt strange, like he was waiting for me. One night, a neighbor across the street told me she also felt weird about him, and he always hung around. She said he did similar things with her when they were outside, so now they started hanging out in the backyard with the kids to avoid him. I usually work from home, but one day, when I went to the office, I got an alert from the Ring camera. This man was standing and looking through our kitchen window, just staring. I could hear our pit bull barking at him. When he saw our dog, he jumped back. So I used the microphone to ask, "Can I help you? What do you want?" He looked super surprised and quickly ran away. I called my husband and told him to watch the video. We both found it really creepy. Later that evening, when we saw the family walking, we decided to tell his daughter about it. But when she talked to her dad, he said it never happened. So we showed her the video on my phone. The daughter seemed pretty mad at him and the whole situation. After that, his strange behavior toned down a bit, and I could tell his daughter was really upset with his actions. As they walked, they had a really intense conversation. Later she told me he's just overly friendly and doesn't mean any harm. She spoke to him, and he promised to leave us alone. I asked if he had a mental issue, or maybe Alzheimer's, since he always seemed lost. She said no, as he had always been like that, and she couldn't wait for his sister to be ready to take care of him up north. A few other neighbors had also complained to her and the homeowners association. About 2 months later, I dropped my son off at preschool. When I got home, I had to rush inside because I felt really sick. While I was in the bathroom, right by the door feeling sick, I heard a rattling noise at the front door. Someone was turning the lock back and forth. My Ring camera alerted me, and I looked at it between heaves. Guess who? It was the old man, trying to get into our home. I went to the microphone and said, "You're at the wrong house." He replied, "Let me in now. I want to tell you something." I swear, it was the best English I ever heard from someone who wasn't great at it. I started feeling better, but stayed really alert. I asked, "What do you want to tell me?" He looked right at the camera and said, "Let me in your house now." That's when I started getting scared. He knew he was at the wrong house, but he kept trying to break in. I said, "Please leave my property. I don't feel safe with you here, and I won't let you in." Then he started rattling the door really hard, trying to pull it open, and then knocking on the bathroom window. Now I got really mad. "Get get off my property right now. I won't let you in. If you don't leave, I'm calling the cops. He stepped back, flipped off the camera, and ran away. I went upstairs and saw him just walking back to his house. I let our pit bull out of our bedroom because he had been going crazy during all of this. I called my husband, and told him to call the daughter and tell her what happened. I called her, explained everything. She told me never to let him in. She warned me that he's been inappropriate and forceful with all the women in her family. She didn't want me to get hurt, especially being pregnant. She came over about an hour later and I showed her the video. She was really angry about it, apologized a lot, and begged me not to call the cops. She promised he'd be gone by the next day. True to her word, he left the next day, and his daughter told him he's not welcome in her home anymore. Now he lives up north in Maryland with his other daughter, probably bothering other people as well. I honestly don't know what might have happened if I didn't trust my instincts that day. I'm just really glad I'm okay.
This happened about a year ago. I have a good friend. Bipolar man, I got help to push back.
I got help to push back.
I'm a female in my early 20s, and I moved out on my own for the first time about 2 years ago. I haven't really talked to my neighbors much, and it makes me a bit worried because nobody here seems to watch out for me. If something seems strange, no one would even notice or check if I'm okay. Last year, I saw a man who often walked his dog in the open area behind my home. This isn't unusual to see because a lot of people use that area. His dog is really cute, and my cat liked to play with it through the glass door in the back. They would run back and forth, and sometimes they'd put their paws on the glass. It was fun to watch. One day, I was outside, and his dog ran up to my porch all happy, wanting to be petted and say hello to my cat. My cat was his kitty friend. That was the first time I talked to this neighbor. Let's call him Mark. Mark seemed like a nice guy, and we got along well. We started hanging out quite a bit in a short time because I smoke outside, and he was always taking his dog out, especially during the summer. So, we bumped into each other a lot. Most days after work, we'd spend an hour or more just talking. This went on for a few weeks. I gave him my phone number, and I was really happy to have a friend in my apartment complex now. But I have to admit, he seemed really interested in having a romantic relationship, or being friends with benefits. I was very clear with him that I wasn't interested in either. And I had to tell him this many times. To be honest, it was starting to annoy me that this topic kept coming up every time we talked. He kept trying to get me to go to his house pretty fast, right from our first talk until the last one. He kept offering multiple times every time I saw him. I always said no, and blamed it on being cautious about COVID. But he eventually got tired of that excuse and invited himself into my home as well. But one day, he came out while I was smoking with a bottle of wine and a couple of glasses. He said I had to try it because it was really tasty. I noticed right away that the seal on the bottle was broken, but it didn't look like anyone had drunk from it. The bottle was full to the top. Then he poured us both some wine and didn't hesitate to say, "Go ahead, take a drink." I felt very uneasy, but I didn't want to make him feel like he was. After all, he poured himself a glass of the same wine, right? I was thinking, what's the worst that could happen? But my mom raised me better than that, so I pretended to take the wine was good. After each of us talked, he kept telling me to drink more. I told him I don't really drink much, so I'm taking it slow. I also noticed he hadn't drunk any, so I told him to go ahead and have some. He didn't grab his glass right away, but in the middle of talking, he reached for it and accidentally spilled the wine in the grass. He didn't make a big deal out of it and said it was my turn to drink. That's when I pointed out, you haven't even had a sip yet. You spilled your drink. Pour yourself another glass. I don't want to drink alone. So he poured another glass, but he still didn't drink from it. A few moments later, he told me to drink mine. I said he needed to catch up, and we kept going around in circles. He reached for his glass again, and guess what happened? He spilled it on the floor, with wine all over the grass. And then, he told me to drink again. At this point, I'd had enough. Too many warning signs were telling me to get out of there. I told him honestly that this seemed really suspicious. I couldn't trust the drink because he refused to drink any of it himself. Yet he was so eager for me to drink mine. He told me he was just clumsy and not used to drinking much. He said he saw me having friends over, taking shots and drinking beers and wine, so he thought I could handle it better than him. But that made me even more uncomfortable. I mean, he's been watching me. Our apartment complex is really big, and he doesn't live close to me. He's like half a block away, and he can't even see my windows or yard from where he lives. So I told him straight up that I'm not drinking anything anymore because of how everything felt weird. But he poured himself another glass anyway, and, you guessed it, he spilled it again. The bottle was almost empty by then. I poured the last of the wine into his glass and told him to drink it with me when I counted to 3. We raised our glasses, and to my surprise, he actually took a sip, and then I spilled mine in the grass. About 2 nights later, he came out while I was smoking and immediately started complaining to me. He was upset that I didn't want to date him or be intimate with him, and couldn't understand why all girls were like this. He got really loud and started shouting at me, asking why I had a problem with him and why I wouldn't do those things. I told him that I had been honest with him since I met him. I said it wasn't about him specifically. I just wasn't interested in dating or being intimate with anyone right now. He kept yelling at me and started talking about his ex and her dog. Yes, her dog. He then went on to tell me about how he used to mistreat that dog terribly. He went into detail about how he wouldn't give it food or water because it did things in the house, and how he would kick it really hard. I was absolutely horrified by what I was hearing, especially because while he was telling me the story, he was playing fetch with his own dog. Now I understand why his dog always seemed really afraid of him, but when I asked him about it before, he used to tell me that his dog had been mistreated by its previous owners, so it was just scared and didn't trust me. The dog was always really happy to see me and would snuggle up with me and stick close by. I used to think I was just special to the dog, but now, knowing what I do, I think the poor dog might be living in an abusive home. I had had enough of this guy, so I told him I needed to leave because my friends were waiting for me. But he kept sending me lots of weird messages when he's outside. My phone would fill up with random messages that never seemed to end. He even texted me saying he knew I was home because he saw me walking around or noticed my car in the parking lot. He would throw his dog's toys onto my porch and stand outside my porch for hours. I think he believed that because I'm a smoker, I would eventually come outside. But he was mistaken because whenever I saw him out there, I would just go out to the front instead. Even before the wine incident happened, he had said some things to me that were also warning signs. I guess the lesson here is to trust your instincts. Sadly, he's still bothering me to this day, and like I mentioned earlier, we only talked and spent time together for a couple of weeks in the summer of last year. My most recent message from him was last night. He asked me what he had done wrong and if I had felt disrespected in any way. I thought about responding to his text with the honest truth about how strange and unsettling he acted, and how he made me feel really uneasy. But I didn't want to give him any suggestions on how to be better. Never drink anything if the seal is broken. I'll take a guess here and say he was definitely trying to tamper with my drink that night.
You can transfer your IRA or old 401k and get a 3% boost only with Robinhood Gold through April 30th.
Hey, it's your dry skin. Help me lock in moisture now and feel it long after with
I'm a 32-year-old woman named Kara, and everything began about 2 weeks ago when I moved into my new apartment. I'd already finished unpacking because I live alone and didn't have a lot of things. Later that day, as I was getting ready to go to work, I grabbed my bag and keys. While I was walking to my car, I noticed someone coming towards me. It was a lady who appeared to be around 45 to 55 years old. She looked like she smoked a lot, seemed very tired, thin. Her eyes had big bags under them that got even more noticeable the longer I looked. "Hi there. You must be the new neighbor," said the old lady, with a voice that sounded really rough from smoking for a long time. "Yeah, I just moved here 3 days ago," I replied politely. Then I noticed she had something in her hands that she was hiding. She seemed really excited to show me. She saw that I noticed it, and that made her even more excited. She had a big smile on her face, but it looked kind of scary. Her teeth were not straight, and some of them looked like they were rotting or missing. Her gums seemed like they might have bled earlier. Her lips were dry and she had blisters on them. She really frightened me. "I want you to meet someone," she told me. Then she showed me what she had behind her back. It was a strange-looking doll that looked a bit like a coconut. Thank you. Nice to meet her," I said. I just said what she wanted to hear to avoid any trouble. "Sorry, but I have to go to work. I'll see you later, ma'am," I said in a polite way. "You don't have to be so formal. You can call me Emma," she said just before I got in my car. I nodded, got in my car, started it, and drove out of the parking lot. I glanced in my rearview mirror for a moment and saw that the lady was staring at me intensely while holding that strange doll. I thought maybe she had been using some substances because of how strange she acted and looked. After work, around 5 o'clock, I drove back to the parking lot. As I entered, I saw Emma sitting right in the middle of the road, playing with her doll. I couldn't believe my eyes. I said to myself, "What on earth is she doing?" in complete surprise as I drove past her. She noticed me in my car and gave me a creepy, decaying smile. I smiled back, just trying to keep calm. I parked my car and got out. In my head, I kept repeating, "Please don't come over here. Please don't come over here," as I walked toward the entrance. I tried not to look at her, but I couldn't help it because I heard her saying hi and singing something. So I kept walking, but also glanced at her. She was singing in a slow and creepy voice, repeating the doll's name over and over. I sped up my walking a bit, and just before I entered the building, I looked back to see if she was still singing. But she had stopped. She was standing, holding the doll in one hand, and the other hand was on her chest. She looked visibly upset for some reason. We were just standing there, looking at each other for what felt like a really long time. Then I snapped out of it, and I mouthed sorry before going into my apartment without looking back. Once I got inside, I locked my door. Emma really scared me, and I didn't want to be near her anymore. I mean, she wasn't being mean or anything, but she just gave me a weird feeling. I put down my things, went to my room, turned on the lights, and lay on my bed, sighing. After a moment, I got up and started cleaning up my mess. I went to the window, a little scared of what I might see. But there was nobody there. I felt really relieved. Part of me thought Emma might be looking at me through my window, but I woke up at a strange time and checked my phone on my bedside table. It was 4:30 in the morning. I tried to understand why I woke up and turned on the bedside light because I felt wide awake for some reason. While I was lying in bed, I started hearing strange tapping noises, and I got really scared. I'm someone who often listens to scary stories and has become a bit paranoid. I didn't know if I should get up and check what was happening or just stay in bed and wait for it to stop. The tapping noises stopped after about a minute, and then I heard some shuffling and what sounded like a whisper. At this point, I was really scared, but I didn't know what to do. Suddenly, everything got quiet for about 5 minutes. I was still too scared to get out of bed when, out of nowhere, my front door slammed really really loudly. This scared me so much that I jumped out of bed and started checking every room to figure out what had just happened. I didn't see anything, so I started getting even more scared, thinking I might be going crazy. The last place I checked was the bathroom, and I looked in the shower to see if someone was hiding there. But to my horror, something was in there, but it wasn't a person. When I saw it, I figured out who had been in my apartment. It was the doll. I don't understand why she broke into my place just to put this silly doll in my bathtub. It doesn't make any sense, and I still don't know why she did it. After this strange incident, I realized how odd this lady really was, and how she could be a danger. I wondered how she managed to get into my apartment, how long she was there, and what else she might have done aside from leaving the doll in the bathtub. The next morning, I searched my whole apartment to figure out how she got in. After about 10 minutes of searching the apartment and checking all the doors and windows, I noticed that my bathroom window was unlocked, and it was even slightly open. This made me really scared, and I got upset with myself for forgetting to do something so important, like locking all the doors and windows. I realized right away that this is how she got inside, and she probably left through the front door, because it was easier. I went to talk to the apartment manager and explained everything that had been happening. I told them I might have to move out soon because of the strange and scary person living next door. Luckily, the apartment staff understood my situation well, and they said they would talk to Emma about what happened. They offered to give me the next month's rent for free if I chose to stay. Since I had just moved in and didn't have much money, I decided to accept their offer. About a week later, and after nothing else strange occurred, I heard from the apartment staff that Emma was being arrested and might be sent to a place for people with mental health issues. They told me that when the manager tried to talk to her about what had happened, Emma confessed to breaking into my apartment. However, she later got very angry and denied everything. She had a tough time and got really angry with the manager just because he wanted to talk to her about what she did. This made her act aggressively, and the police had to arrest her. I have to admit, I felt really relieved when I heard she was arrested. It meant I didn't have to be afraid of her anymore, and it gave me hope for my new apartment. I threw away that creepy doll and decided to move forward with my life after going through such a terrible experience that year. I never want to experience something like that again.
You'll never forget an anniversary when it's easy to get
I want to kind of kind of far because I don't want this thing to break my base.
I've been really scared of changing near windows for a long time. It all goes back to a story I'm going to tell you. Just so you know, I'm a girl, and this happened to me when I was 13 years old, which was 10 years ago. My parents split up when I was just 1 year old, and my brother was 3. So, we used to go to my dad's mobile home every weekend. This happened in the summer before I started 8th grade. I was at my dad's house with my brother. My dad had to take my stepmom to a doctor's appointment that was very close by, just down the street. He had done this before because we had cell phones, and we didn't really go outside much or have friends over at my dad's place. My brother is 2 years older than me, so people thought he was more responsible. When we visited my dad, we had a routine. We would quietly have breakfast before our stepmom woke up. Then, I'd watch a movie in my room, and my brother would play Xbox in his room, which was right next to mine. After finishing the movie, Live Free or Die Hard, I decided to get dressed and do my chores. My room was set up in a way that my bed was next to the window, with my feet facing the window and my head near the door. The TV was right across from the bed, so there was only a small space in the middle where I could walk or change clothes. My dog Chester was lying on the bottom bunk, enjoying the little bit of sunlight that came into my room. While I was lying on the couch, I saw that Chester sat up looking out the window. neighbor, who my stepmom was friends with, got attacked by the same guy. I thought maybe if I had said something earlier, it wouldn't have happened. Thankfully, she wasn't hurt badly. When I told her about the man and what he did, she gave me a hug and agreed that we shouldn't tell my dad. She could handle it. It seems she did. Because a year later, the guy was gone, and I never saw him again. My dad told me about it when she moved into the house, and I was already 21 and didn't stay there on weekends. I asked her not to tell my dad.
Oh shit.
Because I knew how he'd react. Well, that didn't happen. Later that night, my dad got really upset with me for not telling him. I explained that if he knew what had happened, he might have done something drastic. I didn't want to see him get in trouble. He understood, but he wanted me to tell the whole story to him. Even though this happened a long time ago,
Fucking die
I was scared
already,
that I
bro.
might run into that man again. I worried he might end up living nearby,
God is so
or I might wake up to find him through my window.
damn tank.
This event made
Let's
me
go.
scared.
Oh shit, creeper,
Whenever
skeleton.
I hear a noise near the window while I'm getting dressed, I'm always ready to protect my dog and myself.
What the fuck?
What man might have tried to do, or
What
he
the
saw when
fuck?
he looked into my window. To everyone out
No, no,
please
no,
stay
no,
watchful.
no, 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 no,
Trust
no,
your
no, no, no,
instincts.
no, 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 no. Tell me now. I hope nothing grabbed none of my shit. Oh my
My first roommate in college.
god. I killed it though, I killed it.
Sized
Well,
university
damn, bro.
in Ohio. I got a random roommate for my first semester in the dorms. He immediately seemed a little odd to me, just kind of the way he talked and acted in general. Nothing that crazy, but it just stood out to me as a little strange. Still, I tried to make the most of it and would talk to him here and there.
Oh my god.
I was able to make friends rather quickly at school, and within about a month, I sort of had a group of guys that I would hang out with regularly. My roommate, on the other hand, never really seemed.
But I do know, me and my God are going to stay on speaking terms. And I will always, always listen.
Okay, so first off, this happened a few months ago. I had just moved into an apartment complex and only had a bed, a TV, a rocking chair, and an Xbox One. I work in a town that is about an hour away and they didn't have anything available that I could move into. So this big city, that was the next closest place that was also in my price range. The first few weeks play out the same. I get up, shower, go to work for 10 hours,
Yeah, that's
come
my
home,
totem
eat,
though.
watch a little Netflix, go to sleep, repeat. On my days off, I travel 3 hours away to see my wife and kids. Now, we aren't divorced or separated. I had to relocate from the town we lived in to start my career as an asset protection manager. One night as I was going through my evening routine, someone knocks on my door. It's a woman, maybe 5'7", brown hair, skinny. She looked like she was methed out of her skull. Her eyes were barely even open. She asked to talk to someone named Jareth. I told her no one by that name lived here. She said he did. She said she was here last Thursday and he was here. She wanted to buy drugs from him and this was the address she was given. I once again told her that no one named Jareth lived here and then shut the door on her. She started banging on the door, crying on how she needed her fix. I told her to screw off. After a few moments, I heard someone yell at her to shut up or they were calling the cops. The banging stopped and I never saw her again. I sat back down to continue watching the movie that I had on Netflix. I started thinking about what the woman had said. She couldn't have been here last Thursday. I was off work last Thursday and Friday with my wife and children. I started to look around more closely. Nothing seemed out of place. I checked all the windows. Nothing was cracked or broken. All the security bars were locked in their places. There were no upper attic spaces nor crawl spaces. Nothing. I felt a little more secure and went about my night as usual. My next days off, I made sure everything was locked and nothing was out of place. I went to see my wife as usual. I told her about what had happened and she suggested I take the pellet gun. Now I know, what is a pellet gun going to do? Well, in her thinking, it it had a CO2 cartridge in it and 10 pellets. So I took it. When I got back, I looked around. Nothing was out of place. Nothing was missing. I put my stuff up as usual and turned on my Xbox. This is when I noticed something was off. When it powers on, it takes you to the home screen. On this screen, you can see the last thing you were on plus the previous things you've done. When I left it, the last thing that should have been on there was the Netflix app. But it wasn't. Instead, it was Battlefield 1. The one before that was Mortal Kombat X. Someone had been using my Xbox. I once again did a thorough search of the apartment, and I found nothing. It was a couple of days after that, the guy across from me approached me while I was getting out of my vehicle. He said that a lot of people were coming by the apartment on certain nights, and were making a lot of noise, and that it keeps his daughter up, and if I could keep it down or just stop doing whatever it was that I was doing on those nights. I was completely confused as to what the heck he was talking about. I must have shown it because his facial expression changed. He asked me if I was the one who was having people over at odd hours of the night. I told him no, and then I proceeded to tell him the things that were happening. I told him I'm 200 miles away on my days off. We both came to the conclusion that someone was getting into my apartment when I wasn't there. I made the decision not to go see my family one week to see if the person using my apartment would show up. Of course, no one came that week or the week after. It dawned on me at work one day during a conversation about how shoplifters would try to see what vehicle you drove to know if you were there. And that's when it hit me. Whoever was using my apartment knew what I drove. With that in mind, I waited till my next days off to set up my trap. On the said day, I parked my vehicle 3 complexes down and walked back. I unscrewed all my light bulbs and waited in the corner in the living room. I had let my neighbor know what I was doing.
My bad, y'all. I'm back. My apologies. I was eating and had to do something. And my phone's at 17. I never charged my phone. How's everybody doing? My wife's still sleeping. Whatever. She knocked out her permanent gas. Shit. How's everybody doing on YouTube? Right, let's
Good evening,
listen
ladies
to
and
some
gentlemen. Welcome back to Unfold
scary
Diaries.
shit.
Today I am excited to narrate 3 true
We're gonna have another
Craigslist
beacon
horror
now.
stories with you.
That beacon gonna go for like the
But
mining
before we
stuff.
get into the video, please take a moment to consider giving us a like. Plan to meet on a Saturday morning at 11
Okay,
a.m. in the
I'm back, y'all.
downtown park.
Not bad.
So here I am, sitting on the
Ooh,
bench.
what you got, bad guy?
Keep in
What you
mind,
trading?
I didn't get any warning signs from this
You got
guy.
anything good?
I had even called him a few
Ah,
times and had his phone
ooh,
number.
actually, I need that pink.
As I sat on the bench,
Right there.
I couldn't help but wonder why he hadn't shown up yet.
What I got a
It
pink
was
shot
now
about, bro?
11:15, and he was 15
You never
minutes
had too
late.
many.
I'm not the type to be pushy or demanding, so I just sat
Come on,
there,
guys, don't be a
enjoying the
suicidal.
fresh air and the view. The trees were moving with the
You know what I
wind, and the birds were
mean?
singing their
Nobody's
morning song.
looking.
Well, it was now 11:30, and I was starting to get a little upset. I decided to check my phone for the 90th time to see if he had sent me a message or called. But there was nothing. At 11:40, I remember this very clearly. I sent him a text saying, "Hey, where are you?" After sending that, I put my phone down on the bench beside me and just sat there, waiting for a few minutes. Almost immediately after I put my phone down,
This is
I heard
3
it
for
make a
beacon or
sound.
4? I think 4 for a
It was a
beacon.
message from him. We'll call him Steven, although that wasn't his real name. But then something unexpected. And it really shocked me. I sat there, anxiously waiting, wondering what he was going to say next. After about a minute, he finally sent a long message. The message said something like, "This is my grandma." He told me that his grandma had a heart attack and passed away. Now, normally when someone's grandmother dies, people would feel sorry and sad for them. But I didn't feel that. Stopped, and they tried to revive her, but because she was in her mid-90s, it was difficult. Their efforts to revive her didn't succeed. It was really hard for me to type, "I'm so sorry," and that's all I could say. I put my phone down and took a deep breath. I hadn't expected something like this to happen on a Saturday morning. Well, it seemed like the date was canceled, so I didn't even ask him. I got up from the bench and went to my car. I drove back home, which was about 20 minutes away, but because of the traffic, it took about 35 minutes. When I got home, my phone was filled with a lot of messages and calls from this guy. I checked and saw that he still wanted to go on the date. I didn't like the idea of him just witnessing his grandma's death and then still wanting to go out with me. Now it made me wonder if he was even sad or grieving at all. But surprisingly, he wanted to reschedule the date for the same day. I was a bit confused. I mean, I get it. It was his grandma, not his mom or dad, not his brother or sister, and not his wife or husband. So, I guess it makes sense. When someone you're not very close to passes away, you might recover from it more quickly. As strange as it may sound, it's just the reality, and you can't deny it. When someone closer to you passes away, it hits you harder. But I still couldn't understand why this guy wanted to go on a date on the same day he had just witnessed something like that. It would really mess me up. Well, maybe he was just emotionally distant. I was still up for the date, so I said okay, and told him I was ready to meet. He suggested we meet in the park at 5:30. I agreed, but right after I said yes, I realized it was the end of winter, and it was getting dark around 6 to 7 p.m. That made me a little uneasy, because I knew the park would be nearly empty at that time. But I had already agreed, so it was too late to change my mind. I felt stuck, but I also trusted this guy, as he and I had been talking every day for the past few months. I can't remember what I did during the time between saying yes and actually going to the park, but it was about 4 hours of doing various things. I think I cleaned my house and had some food to eat. When I saw that the clock had reached 5, I decided it was time to go. I wanted to be early this time, since he probably would be too. I got in my car and locked up my house. Then, I drove down to the park in the downtown area. I stopped my car in nearly the exact same spot as before, and immediately noticed how much quieter the whole park was this time. The roads around the park had hardly any cars parked along them. It was just something I noticed. I'm not trying to say I felt scared at this point, because I actually trusted this guy, even though it was probably not a wise thing to do. I got out of my car, locked it, and walked over to the same bench area where I had waited for about an hour earlier that morning. He was already sitting there when I arrived. He had his legs crossed, wore a leather jacket, and had glasses on. I had only seen photos of him, but I have to say right away, he looked nothing like those photos. Firstly, he had told me he was 6'2", and I'm 5'10", which is pretty tall for a guy, but he was shorter than me, so that was the first red flag. I understand that a lot of guys lie about their height nowadays. It happens. At first, he didn't see me approaching. As I got closer, I thought, oh boy, I should have worn heels. This is going to be awkward. I must have been about 15 steps away from him when he finally turned around. I think I surprised him because he sort of moved back a bit. Then he got off the bench and came over to hug me. We did the usual cheek kissing thing, and everything seemed nice and polite. His voice sounded just like it did on the phone. The only things that were different were his height and his face. But I couldn't figure out if he had used some kind of filter, or actually edited his pictures with CGI or Photoshop. I felt a bit disappointed if he had done that, because it didn't really look like him. Anyway, we both sat down on the bench and started chatting. We talked about how we finally met in person after months of talking, and then we moved on to our childhood and other things. He had a relaxed attitude, so I was still trying to process the fact that his grandma had passed away earlier that morning, and he had found her. Yet, he seemed happier than ever. After chatting for about half an hour, he suggested we go and get some food. I agreed, so we got up and walked into the town. The park in downtown was right across from the main street, which was convenient. We ended up having pizza at an Italian restaurant and a couple of drinks. The food was delicious, and our conversation flowed smoothly. At times, we even flirted with each other. Although I didn't find him extremely attractive, he was a pleasant guy to be with and quite a smooth talker, no doubt about that. But after we finished eating, things took a sudden turn. I noticed his attitude changed almost right away. It was like he realized our date was ending. As we walked out of the Italian restaurant, he paid for everything and even held the door open for me. He was being really nice, and I was starting to like him. He turned to me, and he was the first to exit after holding the door for me. Then he said, "You're coming to my place," in a bossy way. "Excuse me?" "Yes, you're coming to my place, okay?" It felt like he was suddenly acting like he owned me. A date that had been so nice and relaxed up until this point, so enjoyable, had turned into something I can't even put into words. Within seconds, saying I felt uncomfortable wouldn't even come close. I was standing there, feeling like I had no choice but to go with this guy to his house. I tried to come up with every excuse possible, saying I had to get back because my friend needed me. But he didn't say anything in response. He just stared at me with a look I had never seen from him before. At that moment, I felt really awkward and unsafe. This wasn't the Steven I had known during our date for the past few hours. I don't know if it was because of the drinks or me saying no, but this guy had changed completely. I decided to take a chance and thanked him for the date. Then I moved to the right and started walking fast back towards the downtown park to reach my car. Then I heard his footsteps getting closer behind me. Suddenly, he grabbed my arm and pulled me back towards him. It was him. He pulled me closer to him and said, "No, you're coming with me." I reacted by slapping him in the face and trying to kick him in the groin, but he was protecting himself. He had both my arms in his grip at this point, and this was when I had to fight to defend myself. I let out a loud scream, and it echoed between the buildings on both sides of the street. My screams for help filled the busy high street with panic. After that, many people actually turned their attention toward us, and several men came over to assist me. They kicked the guy away and told him to leave, and eventually, he walked away. I was crying a lot, and I couldn't stop shaking. It felt like this guy was trying to take me against my will, or that's how it seemed. My thoughts were all jumbled, and I felt really confused. In the beginning, for most of our date, he had been really nice, someone great to be with. But as soon as I said no, he turned into someone completely different, someone really mean. Many people gathered around and offered to call the police and an ambulance, but I didn't need them. Yes, the guy had been forceful, but he had left. He had disappeared into the darkness of the city, and that was the end of it. I hate to say it, but he might have had some serious mental health issues, a behavioral problem perhaps. I'm not sure if it was autism or something else, but the truth is, he seemed to lack sympathy and emotion. When he heard no, he became really angry and tried to force me to go with him. I won't meet anyone from Craigslist anymore. Even dating apps like Tinder can be risky. I make sure to only talk to people who are verified and have video calls with them before meeting. When I meet them in person, I try to do it with friends, family, or in group settings or sports activities. This way, I can avoid situations like this.
This was my Jeep when I got it, and here's how I give it a major vibe shift with eBay Motors.
My family and I needed a break. We had to leave the city because it was very stressful. Both my husband and I had full-time jobs. He worked in an office, and I worked at a nursery. Even though I loved working with children, it could be tough sometimes. Dealing with more than 30 noisy 4-year-olds can be a nightmare instead of a dream. So last month, we were searching on Craigslist to find a vacation home. Please don't laugh, but sadly, we didn't have a big budget and couldn't afford an expensive luxury hotel trip. Looking back, using Craigslist wasn't the smartest choice. We probably should have used Airbnb, which is safer and has some rules for people who rent out their homes. But on Craigslist, there were many options, so I started looking What was there to see in the countryside? Mostly cows, grass, and trees. Not many people were interested in that. My kids were always on their smartphones, so that's another reason we chose the rural areas. So in the end, we booked a place. It's a nice little cottage with a few extra buildings on the edge of a big farm. The man who was renting it said he owned the whole farm, and he wanted $100 a night for us to stay in the cottage. That seemed okay because we also got our own small garden with a fence and some other cool stuff. I contacted the owner and told him I wanted to give him some money as a security deposit. He agreed, and I did that in just a few seconds. Now let's skip the difficult part of getting my family ready. I only had 2 kids, or 3 if you count my husband. Getting everyone ready was a big challenge, so I won't go into all the details of that. Just think about it. 5 hours of arguments, kicking, screaming, and tantrums in the car on the way there. The trip itself took a couple of hours, which wasn't too bad. When we finally arrived, I was pleasantly surprised by how nice the whole place looked. Well, that was until I got to the main part of the farm. At first, the entrance of the estate had shiny new metal gates. There were also a couple of statues on both sides, like stone columns. But as we drove further in, things started to look worse. Some of the buildings were falling apart, covered in mold, and had missing bricks. Some of the windows were broken and old, like they were from the 1940s. They were single glazed, which means they had only one layer of glass. Not a great start. But after following the instructions from the owner, we finally found the small bungalow or cottage we had paid to rent. We had paid for a whole week, which felt like too long to me, but we couldn't afford any longer. Plus, I didn't want to stay any longer, especially after seeing the place. So, there we were, sitting in our truck in front of this. Well, it wasn't even a cottage. It looked like it had been built a very long time ago by hand, with cobblestone-like bricks. The truck was running as I put it in neutral. My husband and I had been taking turns driving. It was around 3 p.m. by then, and we hadn't left until late, which caused all the tantrums and arguments. I wondered if this trip was really worth it as we sat there in front of the cottage, so I decided to check out the place. It was important to see if it was even suitable to stay in. It didn't look like a place where people could live comfortably. I know it was summer, but we didn't come here to camp, and having holes in the building wasn't acceptable to me. I wanted my money back, and I wanted it right away. My husband was trying to tell me that this was normal, but I wasn't convinced. So I stepped out of the car, still arguing, to check out the place. But we told the kids to stay in the car, locked it, and then my husband and I went to see what it was like. We found the key where the owner had told us it would be, under the floor mat. Opening the door was no problem. When we went inside, it wasn't as bad as I had expected. I went quiet, and my husband was trying to explain that it just looked bad from the outside. Well, as we moved from room to room, I started to think that maybe he was right. It was clean and tidy. A 3-bedroom cottage with a bathroom that wasn't covered in mold, falling apart, or filled with sewage. The inside of the place actually looked pretty good, which was surprising given how it looked from the outside. So we decided to stay. I unlocked the truck and told the kids to come inside. We brought all our suitcases and bags in and got settled. By this time, it was around 4 p.m., and we started to relax. The furniture, appliances, and everything inside were old, but it wasn't terrible. The outside of the cottage was in bad shape, but they had made an effort to keep the inside nice. It seemed like they had put in new flooring and did some renovations. As the evening approached, we still had to prepare dinner. I had bought a lot of supplies, including dry pasta, rice, some sauces, and even some meats that were in our cooler in the back. On the first night, we were going to have spaghetti bolognese, and that's when everything went wrong. At was starting to feel comfortable and relaxed. I was in the kitchen. The kids were in their rooms playing on their iPads, and my husband was sitting and watching the small old TV. I was daydreaming for some reason, not sure why. While preparing the food in the kitchen, I looked out the window. I was actually starting to enjoy this calm feeling. Normally all I saw was busy traffic on the street below, with the city constantly making noise and bright lights. I'll be honest, I got used to it, but that didn't mean it didn't drive me crazy. I just got used to it over time. As I was cooking, everything was going well. In fact, it didn't take me too long to make the bolognese. Maybe about 15 to 20 minutes. I just had to cook the ground meat and boil the pasta. The sauce came in a jar, ready to use. I poured the sauce in, mixed everything together, and heated it in a big frying pan that I had bought, by the way. Yeah, I was a bit picky. My youngest daughter liked to have her bolognese separate from her pasta, which was kind of strange. She preferred to have the spaghetti in one bowl, without sauce, and the bolognese meat and sauce in another bowl. After I cooked everything and prepared her separate bowls, I served the meal and called everyone to the kitchen table. The kitchen table was old and made of carved wood. It looked like someone had made it by hand, and it was probably the nicest thing in the house. Although my husband would disagree, as he was still glued to the old small television. When we all gathered at the table and were ready for dinner, my little girl said something really strange. Just as she was about to eat her spaghetti, she picked up her fork and said, "You, Mom, why is it green?" I glanced over and didn't think much of it. But when I went closer, I noticed that it did have a slight greenish tint. The pasta had a greenish color, which I found a bit odd. I couldn't see it on our plates because it was already mixed with the red bolognese sauce and meat. I told her not to worry and made up a story about it being a different kind of pasta. I wasn't being honest, but I was just so tired from 2 hours of traveling and the stress of seeing the outside of this place. We all finished our meal, and not more than a couple of hours later, the trouble started. First, my husband had to run to the toilet and was throwing up a lot. Then my daughter started having really bad diarrhea. Luckily, this cottage had 2 bathrooms. To make a long and gross story short, we later found out that the water we used to cook the pasta, which came from a well near the cottage on the farm, was contaminated. It hadn't been tested for safety, and it caused all our stomach problems. After that, we all got sick and had to stay in the cottage for 4 days. It was a tough time. When we finally got better, we went straight back home. But during our illness, we had to have doctors visit us. At one point, my 2 youngest kids were almost dehydrated because they were vomiting and having diarrhea so much. So I wouldn't call it a vacation, and it was far from relaxing. The person who owned the farm and estate didn't respond to us after that. We didn't want to take any legal action because we just didn't want to deal with it, and my husband felt the same way. But there was definitely something wrong with the water. It had a greenish color, and the well was clearly contaminated with some kind of bacteria that didn't agree with our stomachs. Those 4 days were awful. Really awful. We were so desperate that my husband ended up staying in one bathroom, and my 2 children stayed in the other. I stayed outside and used a big bowl I found in the kitchen. It was a large bowl they used for mixing flour and baking. Thankfully, I didn't have diarrhea, but I was very sick too. We all tried to sleep it off, but during those 4 days, there was constant vomiting and crying. It was terrible, and the worst was on the 3rd day when we called 911 because of my youngest daughter. Every time she tried to drink something, she would just throw it back up. I was getting really scared, but I was so tired that making the call to 911 was hard for me. When the medical team arrived, they gave all of us shots in our behinds to stop the vomiting. It worked, and we all started feeling better after getting the shots. In the end, we all recovered fully and returned home.
Marty's Philly cheesesteak favorites are back. Handcrafted creations with sauteed peppers, onions, and melty cheese to reinvent the signature Philly classics. Some
From Craigslist to watch the front of our house. They show you when people come to your door. I've lived in my neighborhood for 3 years, and it has many houses. Also, my wife and I had our first baby, so I thought it was a good idea to get one. I set up the camera and got an app for it. The app tells me if something moves near my front door, no matter where I am. The first night after setting it up, I woke up at 2 in the morning because the app sent me a message that something moved near my front door. I was really surprised to get this message. I opened the app to see what was happening. I was really scared when I saw a man's face very close to the camera. Then I realized it was my neighbor Dan. He was making a funny face in the camera. I got a little confused, but then I thought Dan probably saw the camera being put up and came over to play a joke on me. He kept walking around, looking at the camera and making funny faces for about 5 minutes. Then he went away. I didn't know Dan very well, but we had talked a few times. After that, I went back to sleep feeling much better. I planned to visit Dan the next day to talk to him, but I forgot all about it when I woke up in the morning. I didn't really think about it much until a few days later. I was up late watching TV on a Friday night. Then I got another notification that something moved near my front door. When I checked the app, I saw my neighbor Dan again, but this time he didn't look happy. He was just pointing at the camera. I thought he must be joking again, so I went to the front door to surprise him. But when I opened the door, he ran away through my yard and jumped over the low fence between our yards. It seemed really strange to me. But like I said, I didn't know Dan very well, so maybe this was just his way of having fun. The next day, I remembered what happened and decided to go talk to Dan. I knocked on his door, and when he answered, I said I liked his prank. He looked confused and asked what I meant. So, I told him about what I saw on my camera. He said he didn't go to my house at night and didn't know what I was talking about. I showed him the video as proof, but he looked surprised. He said he had no memory of it and apologized. I told him it was okay and went back home. I'm not sure if I believe Dan or not, but since then, he hasn't done it again, and I hope it stays that way.
Okay, so we pick it up, man.
Maybe I'm getting too worried, but something happened today that I want to talk about and hear what you think. A friend sent me a Craigslist ad for some dolls with lots of extra things for only $50. It was a really good deal for all the stuff it included. So I emailed the person, but didn't get a reply. I thought, oh well, maybe someone else got it before me. Then, I got an email saying, sorry, I've been out all day today. Where can you pick it up? The message was sent from an iPhone. I replied, I can pick it up tomorrow. What time and where do you want to meet? I didn't get a response, so I went to bed. The next morning, I got an email from the person saying, I waited at the chapel school for about 10 minutes, and you're not here, so I'm gonna leave. I replied, saying I'm really sorry. I didn't get any emails last night before going to bed, and I just woke up, so I didn't know I had an appointment. But I can come to your home if that's okay. It's only a 30-minute drive for me. to my car and sent another email, telling her which school I chose from the 2 options I listed earlier and that I was on my way. It was the weekend, meaning the school would be closed and there wouldn't be anyone around. I didn't receive an email telling me which school it was, so I was just hoping I picked the right one. After about 5 minutes, a black SUV pulled up next to me. There was a nice couple in their late 30s inside, and 2 big dogs in the back seat. The woman gets out of the car, holding a really big closed box. She says I can look through it, before giving her the money. We're standing at the right front of her SUV. Then I see the guy getting out of the car, and walking to the back. I thought he was checking on the dogs from the back hatch. But no. He walks around the back of the car, and then comes up behind me in my blind spot. I turned to look at him with a really surprised expression, because I found it weird. He had a half smile on his face, and he wouldn't look me in the eye. It made me nervous, and my skin started to crawl. I got that really sinking feeling deep in the pit of my stomach. I realized there was no one else around, and there was really no reason for him to leave his car and come up behind me like that. I put the box in my car, keeping an eye on the guy, and hurried away. If he just wanted to keep his wife safe, why didn't he get out of the car?
Hey guys.
Before we exchanged money? And why did he go the long way around the car to come up behind me, when the shortest way to his wife was in the front where we were closest? Why bother putting 2 big dogs in an SUV for just a 3-minute ride? I really think the dogs were meant to distract me, but I'm not sure. And maybe they changed their minds when they realized I wouldn't be an easy target. It was really weird. I'm not someone who thinks everything is dangerous, but there was definitely something disturbing about the whole situation. Luckily, I got away safely, but I can't help wondering what they were really up to. I bought a new Apple Watch but didn't use it much, so I wanted to sell it on Craigslist. I took photos of the front, back, and each band, then posted the ad. I got a bunch of responses right away, so I decided to answer them one by one, giving priority to the first person who contacted me. One of the responses was from a man in the military. He explained that he wanted to buy the watch as a graduation gift for his cousin who was finishing school. The military guy's reason for getting the watch was nice, so I decided to sell it to him. Then he explained that his cousin's graduation party was happening that weekend, and he wanted the watch to be there on time, so he asked if I could send it the next day. He promised to send some extra money to cover the faster shipping. I agreed because it sounded like a good idea. After our conversation, I received a PayPal receipt from him. I took the watch to the post office to send it off. After I sent the package and shared the tracking number with him to ensure the gift would arrive on time, something felt strange. I realized I didn't get any email from my bank about the money transfer. So when I looked at the PayPal receipt again, I noticed some little things that seemed a bit off, and the payment confirmation had some unusual details. Usually when I sold stuff on Craigslist, I'd check the sender's address to make sure it was real. But this time, the person sent the payment through PayPal.
Let's leave.
And unfortunately, I didn't double check it. I was in a hurry and kind of confused, and I believed the story about the guy needing the watch urgently for a graduation party the next day. The address on the PayPal receipt was a bit sketchy. It wasn't like a normal PayPal address should be. As I paid more attention, I noticed other things that didn't add up. The whole receipt seemed off, and not like a valid PayPal. Now I felt like a fool, because I'm usually the one telling people to be cautious about these things. I was just trying to help this person, up falling for the scam. I went to the local police station to share what happened. They said, since I lived in an unincorporated area, I needed to talk to the sheriff's office. The folks at the sheriff's office were really helpful. They sent someone to meet me at my local police station, and we had a good talk about the whole situation. I shared all the details, the ad, the response, the man in the military, and the rush for next day shipping. The deputy who was helping me explained that without the serial number, there wasn't much they could do. It was a bit disappointing, but he assured me that he would write a report. Hold on. Then I remembered I took pictures of everything. Even though I fell for the scam, I had a photo of the back of the watch and another one with the serial number. So, I might have been foolish, but at least I was a smart fool. The deputy wrote down the serial number and the address where I sent the watch. He told me he would talk to the local police and see if they could figure things out. I went on to share the story with my boyfriend, friends, and parents. 2 days after, the deputy called and said they got a warrant for the house where I sent the watch. They searched the house and found not just one watch, but thousands of them. To be exact, these folks had watches worth thousands and tens of thousands of dollars. There was a woman who allowed the items to be sent there. It turned out she was receiving these things for her fiancé. She said those things were gifts, and that her fiancé is a good and honest man. The police tried to explain to her that he might not be telling the truth, that he's stealing things. The deputy mentioned that because I reported it in the suburbs of Chicago, people from all over the country might get their valuable items back. A few days later, they called and said my watch was ready. I had to go to this intimidating jail building to get it. I went through a scanner, got checked for weapons, and talked on a phone to explain why I was there. Then lady guided me to a room with lockers and handed me an envelope with the package. I was surprised to see that everything was still wrapped in the tissue just like how I packed them. Now, I make sure to wear my watch every day, and I've decided to stay away from using Craigslist. My friend teaches piano to lots of people, and she used to put ads on Craigslist to find students. She would tell them how much it costs for lessons, but I forgot the exact amount. Anyone could sign up for lessons, whether they wanted to learn alone or in a group.
Okay, bro?
My friend teaches piano to people at different skill
Don't feel
levels,
good.
even helping them with exams in music theory and practical skills. She's really good at playing the piano. Even now, she plays almost every day. She has 3 keyboards and a grand piano. The grand piano is super expensive, like $40,000. One day she put an ad on Craigslist, telling people she could teach them piano for some money. At the time, teaching piano was her main job, and it's how she made her living. After about a week, she got a few replies. 2 were from ladies, and 1 was from a man. She chose to teach the man first, and then planned to reschedule the ladies for later in the week. The man was supposed to come over in the week, maybe around 4 or 5 p.m., right after he said he finishes work. My friend told me that when he walked up to her house, he seemed really weird. He was difficult to describe.
For the 2nd year in a row, Chevy Equinox has been
Hey,
ranked by J.D. Power
too
number
many
1 in new
ads.
vehicle quality.
Because when I asked her, she couldn't say much about him. The only thing she kept talking about was the feelings she got from him.
Okay.
The feelings were so bad that she felt sick and nervous about letting him into her house for the lessons. But she thought since the guy was there with the money, paying her before the lesson, she went along with it. So, when she held the money, she felt like she couldn't do much. Even though she could say no right there at the door. But she thought she wouldn't have the confidence to do that. She would need a good excuse to turn him away. So,
Oh, only a baby
despite
guy.
feeling uneasy, she chose to let this guy into the house, going against her gut feeling. They went ahead with the
sorry,
piano
but I
lesson,
don't need
and it
to
went on
know.
for about 40 minutes. He took a seat at the grand piano, and
I don't
believe
need
it or
him.
not, she started
He's
the
a
lesson
baby.
with an expensive
He's a baby. I need the
3,000
big
grand piano.
villagers, not
I
babies.
always told her not to do that, as I thought it would be better for her students to begin on the keyboards, considering the cost and all. But I guess, to be professional, she thought it was okay. She took out her music books, theory notes, and chords to start the lesson. I don't know much about what pianists do, but she taught the lesson. When it ended, the guy was still acting strange. She also mentioned he wasn't a great learner and had trouble playing even simple scales. His fingers were awful, big and clumpy for playing the piano, so he often missed some keys or pressed two at the same time. But her job was to teach him, so she did her best. After the lesson, she suggested scheduling more lessons regularly, like every week, to help him get better at playing the piano. Everyone knows that top musicians practice a lot throughout their lives. The saying, practice makes perfect,
I ain't
is
got no
really
spot
true in
on
that
here.
world.
Oh shit.
So my friend recommended having a lesson once a week to improve his piano skills. The guy looks at her and
That's
says,
your house?
"No, I'm fine.
Yes, sir.
Thanks for the lesson, though."
Yeah, I like it.
As he's getting ready to leave,
I like it.
he suddenly stops at the door. He starts staring at my friend, checking her out from head to toe, like he's thinking about doing something really bad. "Is everything okay?" she asked. She even went on to say, "Do you need to use the bathroom?" The guy stared at her blankly for another 3 seconds. Then, as if he suddenly snapped back to reality, he said, "No, I'm okay, thanks. Thanks for the lesson." After that, he walked out the door and left. She closed the door and told me that she felt really uneasy. Well, to make a long story short, after many weeks passed, it turned out that the guy she taught piano to during that 40-minute lesson was Philip Markov. He was known as the Craigslist killer, convicted of murdering women he met through Craigslist. We couldn't believe what had just happened. Somehow he had decided to not take action on my friend. In that moment at the doorway, when he looked her up and down,
Huh.